Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
School performance, the police surveillance trial, and much more tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by a roundtable of journalists, starting with Toby Sells, news editor at the Memphis Flyer. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Eric.
Laura Faith Cabetta is an education reporter with Chalkbeat. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
Karanja Ajanaku is editor and publisher of the New Tri-State Defender. Thanks for being here again.
My pleasure.
And Bill Dries is senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. Let's start with school performance and a whole lot of school stuff that everyone can comment on. But I'm going to turn to you first, Laura. The TN Ready, the testing and the rankings of all the schools in terms of progress made and not made, all of that came out very recently. Talk about your impressions, and we'll get into specifically some of the iZone, the really challenged schools within Shelby County and the impact on ASDs and charters. But just talk about first impressions and the general impact of these test scores.
Well, the first thing to note is that these scores are the second of the state's new test, TN Ready. So this is the first time we're able to truly compare one to another for elementary and middle schools. And one of the things for Shelby County was that a lot of the schools grew, but a lot of performance is still pretty low, especially in those struggling schools that we talked about.
When you say they grew, the scores got better. There
Right.
was progress in a lot of them, but still in the low-performing group statewide.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the iZone schools, talk about those specifically and define what the iZone schools are.
So the iZone schools were created in 2012 to be able to improve the lowest performing schools in the state, and that's something that's led by Shelby County Schools. And there's money, resources pumped into those schools to be able to retain teachers, to have different resources like clothes closets or food closets to combat poverty's effect in the classroom. And there was a lot of growth this year, especially with elementary schools, but the high school and middle schools are struggling from what the district has said and what the scores say. And so there's now a more renewed focus to focus on those upper grades, because literacy, especially in early grades, has been improving.
And yeah, one of the elementary schools was at A.B. Hill, had kind of a remarkable improvement year over year, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They went from, I think it was about 7 or 8% to 15% of their students reading on grade level, but that also means that 85% were not.
Right. And then last, ASD, which was the Achievement School District, which was formed, and around the same time the iZone school was formed, so that would be about 2009. Chris Barbick, who was the original superintendent, was on the show a number of times back then. But the ASD was always under some fire, but it has been under particular fire in recent couple of years, right? Some accusations of scandal in terms of how they were spending money back at the office and so on. But where do things stand with the ASD?
Well, one important thing to note is that Vanderbilt recently came out with a study that said that the ASD schools in the Achievement School District, they also started in 2012, same year as the iZone schools, and that they are no better off than schools that didn't receive any intervention. So they weren't in the iZone, they weren't in any special program, but they're performing about the same as the Achievement School District.
And they have not added any ASD schools, was it this year or last year? Or I can't quite remember.
Right, because of the TN Ready problems of the online delivery of the test, they decided to pause until things got a little bit less rocky.
Bill, your take on the score, the performance results, and what kind of impact that has locally?
It has a tremendous impact for grades 3 through 8, because the results just for those grades seem to show that the literacy efforts, very specific literacy efforts that Shelby County Schools has been planning for and has rolled out with a lot of fanfare, that seems to be working. The problem here is that the literacy efforts as reflected for high school students in the end of course exams was very lagging. Dorsey Hobson, the superintendent of Shelby County Schools, estimated that if you were just talking about grades 3 through 8 in that regard, that that would probably be a level 5. Well, the overall school system was level 2. And what brought it down was the problems with literacy among high school students.
Yeah. Kranji, you're nodding your head. Your thoughts on these test results?
Well, agreement with what I hear. When I talked to Mr. Hobson last week, he talked about the importance of pre-K and how you can start to see the pre-K results, particularly with some of the third graders and how they're making their improvements relative to reading at third grade level. But relative to this idea of on grade level, this idea of what are you going to do about middle schools and high schools? I mean, what I hear them talking about are things like adjusting the curriculum, bringing in reading specialists to try to help, and also some changes on the board level to narrow the gap between resources and expertise at the board level to help teachers in the classroom.
Right. There's been an acknowledgement by Superintendent Hobson that the rollout at the high school level has not been what they thought it should be in terms of materials, in terms of teacher preparation for moving into this area. And so are the lessons, are the methods that you use in grades 3 through 8 the same as you use for middle or into high school? Probably not. So there is some work to be done.
Yeah, and Strickland is pushing. I think so many groups, have pushed for this increased pre-K funding because of those numbers that say that by, something like by third grade, that's defining, how good a reader you'll be, and the longer you go and get into middle school and high school, it's just that much more work to bring people up to speed. You can do a whole lot more with a younger person. Let's also talk about, Haslam came out, we are recording on Tuesday, we should say, just early because of some scheduling issues, but Haslam came out with a task force to look at the Tennessee Ready testing. What was that about?
He will have a task force that's going to be appointed. He's going to do some town hall meetings across the state. If you're seeing this on Friday, the governor will have been in town here on Wednesday for several stops, including at an Achievement School District school. To look in there and possibly make some comments on this. I think as he's leaving office, Governor Haslam is really making a bid here to say, don't throw out the testing overall. There were some problems with the administration of the TN Ready testing, but he's really making an effort here as he leaves office to say there has to be accountability at a higher level, and the problems with the test don't justify doing away with the testing entirely.
Yeah, and we'll segue a little bit. So obviously Haslam is on his way out. He's term limited. We have two candidates, Democrat, Republican, moving towards an election in November. And you, I believe Laura wrote recently a story kind of looking at Carl Dean, the Democrat, his positions and what he's talked about and prioritized with education versus Bill Lee. I'll put you on the spot. What are they saying about testing and Tennessee Ready specifically, and what were your general impressions, as you were comparing their perspectives on education policy?
Yeah, so our Nashville correspondent, Marta Aldrich, had sent out a survey to both of them to get an understanding on what their thoughts were on testing, and both are not happy with the online administration of it and want to take a deeper look at it. As far as what that could entail, we will see. But there has been a growing call among state lawmakers, even superintendents, Dorsey Hobson and Sean Joseph out in Nashville, to say we need to pause until we can get the online administration part right.
And then we'll switch from education, and again, this is a bit of a time warp because the decisions can be made on Tuesday. Again, this is airing on Friday and the weekend. But the Compass school system, which is going to take over the Jubilee schools, for people who aren't following that, talk about what's going on with Jubilee schools and the potential takeover. So
Jubilee Catholic schools were one of the very few private school networks that were willing to take on vouchers, which is state-funded money towards tuition for students to go into private schools. And when that continued to fail in the state legislature, they turned to a different method, and that is to be able to have these schools be charter schools instead, which means they would have to strip out the religious component and have different leadership structure, though a lot of the leaders are planning on joining in that charter group. And so Shelby County Schools is set to vote tonight on whether they will convert those 6 schools.
Right. And again, by the time this airs, Chalkbeat and probably all of our papers, one way or another, will have reported on the result of that vote. I'll switch over to maybe you, Karanja. The police surveillance trial that's going on right now started, I think, last week, has been going on a federal trial putting between the ACLU and the Tennessee ACLU and the police department. Talk about the background on that and your observations so far of that trial.
Well, the trial is ongoing, and I think as we're talking today, there's a possibility that the police director, Mr. Rawlings, may actually testify today. But we've got a situation where the judge has already ruled, Judge McCalla, that there was a violation of the 1978 consent decree relative to not being able to use certain police-type measures relative to certainly non-criminal type folk, and there's been a violation of that. And so the trial is going on to look at some other issues, and one of the things we'll figure out is to what degree there were additional violations, and the result of that will put us in a position of knowing what type of sanctions they're going to be. But when you look at it overall, that there isn't any question that there were some tactics that make some of us just sort of cringe. You know, you've got people with Homeland Security Division going online and posing as non-African American people or white boys, or really weird kind of
but
stuff.
But they were fake profiles.
Fake profiles.
Created by the police.
Yeah,
is
and
what's
so
being discussed.
there isn't any issue that the police department and law enforcement has the right and the need to maintain social order, but how wide do you spread that net? I mean, is what we're looking to find out here.
Yeah, Toby, your thoughts on the trial so far?
The social media part of it has been really fascinating. That's been the biggest part of the trial. Yesterday afternoon, there was an account set up, I guess Sergeant Tim Reynolds, I think, with the police department's Homeland Security Unit, and under the name of Bob Smith, is that right? Mm-hmm. And posing as a person of color to infiltrate different groups. He said he wasn't gathering political intelligence necessarily, but a little creepy when this person's interacting with people in a group and you take that this person is actually a real person, and gaining intelligence on the size and where your event's taking place and all those kind of things. And protesters and activists have said that it kind of amounts to intimidation. They feel like, Tammy Sawyer said, I think in a commercial appeal story that she's County Commission-elect Tammy Sawyer, that, she would get online and talk about something, and within 30 minutes, the police would be there. And it felt weird, and it felt odd. And, and Director Rawlings has argued that, in this day and age, that this is a tactic that we need to be using, that, if we're not using that we're really not doing as much as we can to hold public safety, and I agree to that in a little bit. But yeah, does it violate that consent decree? I guess that's up for the judge to decide.
Maybe go back, Bill, on the consent decree, which goes back to what, 1978?
1978. This was entered into as a consent decree. What happened was Vietnam-era protesters discovered that there was a domestic intelligence unit of the police department which had been doing much the same thing pre-social media, keeping tabs on not just Vietnam-era protesters, but into the civil rights movement during the sanitation workers' strike, perhaps before that. We'll never really know, because by the time the legal proceedings got around to actually seeing the files, the police department announced that it had burned the files because they were old and they were out of space and it was time to get rid of them.
This again was back in the 70s.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this was in the late 70s. The city was declared in contempt of that court decree less than a year later because the police were photographing Iranian students and Acorn, an activist group at the time, protesters, at the Democratic National Midterm Convention, which was held here in Memphis in 1978. The testimony in this trial clearly shows that this was more in the present here and now than police simply saying, oh, there's a protest, there's no permit for it, or there is a permit for it, and showing up at the protest to maintain safety. The police were following people, were listening in on people when there was no protest in anticipation of the next protest. They were showing up at private gatherings. This was clearly over the line, and that's not just my opinion. That's what the judge has ruled in this case.
Yeah, and it is interesting that it is surveillance. You talked about, you know, the role of police, Karanja, and you know, if I'm going to make a ridiculous scenario up. If the police are listening in on something and a horrific murder or a horrific mass shooting or something is going on, I think there's this debate about, well, they prevented some sort of terrible shooting or murder or something. This is, as Bill pointed out, this was surveillance of potential protests, legal protests. Maybe there wasn't a permit, but protest is part of the free speech and so on. And so it is. You know, what were the police looking for when it was really just plans and discussion of protests?
Well, my understanding that the police department makes the argument that as a result of their activity, they actually kept certain protest or gatherings from turning into what they were to something more violent. They're also making the argument that when you look at other cities and some things that were happening there, I think they mentioned Dallas and the shooting there, that they needed to take these type of procedures to be in a precautionary measure to keep those types of things.
And all of this was at a time, it came out, Black Lives protests, the bridge was shut down, there were a number of protests, criticisms of Strickland and how he had handled that, and so it's good to reel back, and then there was the horrific sniper shooting in Dallas and some other shootings.
Well,
to be fair,
the trigger for this was the bridge protest. That's when this really ramped up on the part of the Memphis Police Department, and the police department contends that were it not for police intervention during the bridge protest, that it very well could have turned violent. I was at the bridge protest. Yes, there were gang members there. This was not an instance of gang members showing up to prey on the crowd that was there. They were part of the march, along with fraternity and sorority members, along with young professionals. It was a very mixed crowd.
Along with my at the time, high school son who was up there. Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
Right. And yes, Director Rawlings going onto the bridge and meeting with the protesters was a part of the chronology of that. But to say that were it not for that protest would have turned violent, I don't think is an accurate statement, having been there.
Yeah. Other thoughts before we move on? We'll switch now with about 10 minutes left to the city is looking at studying reforming pilots, the tax incentive program, and which right now is administered by EDGE. We had Reed Dolberger, the administrator of the CEO of EDGE, I should say, on just a couple weeks ago. Bill, what is the city looking at? What are they exploring and why?
There will be a report. It's supposed to come out in 90 days on this. It will consider various options along the lines of what's been discussed for quite some time, and that is a change in the city's economic development strategy. The new element is that this could include the city withdrawing from EDGE and going back to a Memphis-only industrial development board. The question immediately came up during the council discussion. Well, okay, if you have a Memphis-only industrial development board that has the power to abate property taxes, does it have the power to abate county property taxes as well? And the answer to that was, well, there are suburban towns and cities who have IDBs that are limited to their towns and cities only, and they have a memorandum of understanding with Shelby County government to do those very abatements as well.
Yeah, Toby.
We've talked on the show before about pilot fatigue, and the more people I talk to, the more I hear about people having this, they're just kind of tired of seeing this money go out the door. And it seems like the changes that they want to make would be to streamline that process, make it easier for more money to go out the door, that's what's holding us back. We're not able to offer these incentives fast enough and big enough. And for a lot of folks, that's a problem. They feel like that's going the opposite direction of what we should be doing, which is to have another deeper look at this strategy of giving tax breaks to wealthy developers here in town and keeping some of that tax money or trying to keep some of the tax money here for fire and police and those kind of things.
Yeah, and the supporters of pilots and we had the show recently would say, well, no money goes out the door. Right. It's not a cash incentive. It's not tax money that's being given away. It's a change in the tax rate in order to lower the cost of that construction. That's right. Just to be fair, that's what they
yes,
would
sir.
Say. Your take on? I mean, do you see pilot fatigue? I mean, it's a huge issue because as city leaders and county leaders will say, it's one of their only real they will claim it is one of their only real incentives to play that game to entice developers into Memphis. Other cities, even across the border, they have other ways of cash incentives, of actual cash payments effectively to developers. The city of Memphis County, Shelby County, only have this tool, they will claim.
Well, I just think that Bill touched on it earlier, and that is that there's just a larger thing going on here in terms of how do we go about economic development in city of Memphis and Shelby County. And so there's talk about adjustments that we need to make relative to the EDGE board. I think about the same time as the City Council came up with this new commission, the county committee, the county commission also was making some movement relative to this joint city resolution, council resolution, to look at how we relate to the EDGE board, the makeup of the EDGE board, who does the EDGE board report to, and all those types of things. So I'm actually sort of hopeful in a way because while all movement is in progress, I do like the sort of consistent talk and conversation that I see in a lot of different quarters relative to what we're going to do about economic development.
Yeah, and that Karanja alluded to this change the county commission was moving towards. Certainly, one of the transition co-chairs for Lee Harris, who was recently elected to the county commission seat, was a little concerned that the commission was moving to strip the incoming mayor of some authority over EDGE. Where does that stand, Bill?
The resolution that the county commission has not approved, but is discussing and might vote at their last meeting of the term coming up next week, would give the county commission and the city council power over who is appointed to the EDGE board. Currently, the mayors nominate those people to the board, and the county commission and city council approve it. It would also have the EDGE CEO and president report to the board, as opposed to reporting to the two mayors, the city and county mayor. And the thought there is that that's the better alignment because the CEO and president works with the board. And so those are some adjustments really to the structure of EDGE as opposed to its basic purpose.
And then there's a whole lot of discussion, we'll move on, but about who is the marketing person? Who is the person who sells Memphis? Is that the Memphis Chamber of Commerce, of which we are a member, and some of you all may be members, but I should say we are members. Is the Chamber of Commerce and the current president of that board, Richard Smith from FedEx, is pushing really hard that that they need more marketing, that there needs to be someone who's marketing, that EDGE is much more of an administrator of these incentives. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in this whole mix of what the maybe refined or changed role. If EDGE stays, will the role and relationship between city, county, and chamber be refined, change, or stay the same?
Mm-hmm. And folks who watch the show on a regular basis know that several weeks ago we had Reed Dahlberger at this very table repeating again that when EDGE was formed in 2011, the original agreement was that the chamber would be the salesperson. They would be the contact, they would be the person out there courting prospects, and EDGE would be the folks who do the detail work and deliver on the promises.
Right. With just a couple of minutes left, we mentioned Lee Harris and transition. Thoughts from anyone on the things you've seen so far? He named Paul Morris, who was former head of Center City Commission, Downtown Memphis Commission, as one of his co-chairs. Lionel Hollins, former coach of the Grizzlies. Any other thoughts on Lee Harris?
I was just struck by some of the comments about that this is not necessarily going to be cleaning house at the administration. I think that the Harris administration will take some new directions that are departures from the Luttrell administration, but some of the division directors will probably stay. So this won't be a house cleaning in terms of personnel, but there will likely be some changes in policies.
Some of the priorities, education-wise, coming back to you, Laura, that Lee Harris talked about in the election, what your sense of the prospect of those being actually implemented? Well,
one of his big things that he really wants to see is more pre-K funding, and there has been a lot of movement on that side from the city, from the county to come up with a plan, but that still is in flux. It's not, finalized. It's not to the point where it can fill the gap of the federal grant that is expiring and to have universal pre-K for families that need it.
Any other thoughts on Lee Harris as we see so far? Well, last thing, in the City Council has been trying to work through a compromise on historic districts and how new historic districts would be done, whether I think Cooper Young would be named one, Speedway Terrace. I'm sure I'm leaving a couple out. They'd moved through a bunch of different compromises. It wasn't clear whether they were going to be able to vote and approve this compromise, but it was moving towards that. And then the State Historic Commission of who we all know from when we were covering and talking about the statues and the Confederate statues and their removal. What happened, Bill? How did the State Historic Commission get involved?
This was
the city of Memphis designating neighborhoods historic districts.
This was a real interesting twist. The Friday before what was to be the third and final reading, which had been delayed since June, the city got a letter from the Tennessee Historic Commission saying that, well, if you do this, then it might endanger some historic preservation funding. And
I think Alan Wade, the city attorney, called it $300,000 over 12 years. Right. Is that correct?
Yeah, his exact quote was, "Are you kidding me?"
That's a lot of money.
And so as a result, Kemp Conrad, the sponsor and author of the compromise, he tabled it. It takes 7 votes to take it off the table. The state insisted, well, go ahead and pass this, and it's something that we can work through. And he was having none of it. He said the tone of the letter was threatening, and he tabled it.
And Kemp, I think, Kemp Conrad, city councilman, drew some comparisons to how the statues were handled. Toby, as a proud resident of Cooper Young, do you have any thoughts on the State Historic Commission coming in and dictating what happens?
It was interesting. It was interesting to hear Berlin Boyd and Kemp Conrad kind of give their thoughts on is this Nashville coming back on us again? But I think Speedway Terrace and Cooper Young got their historic districts passed. Isn't that right, Bill?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And we're done. I didn't give Toby enough time. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for joining us. Join us again next week.